You're listening to the Neurocareers podcast with Dr. K, episode number 4. Dear listeners, welcome to the Neurocareers podcast. Today we continue exploring careers in neuroscience and neurotechnologies. And our guest, Ramon David, kindly agreed to help us with that. Ramon is joining our international podcast from Australia. Hello, Ramon. Thank you for joining us. Can you tell our listeners about yourself, please?
Hi, Melina. Great to be here. Yeah, sure. So I run a company called Brainfirst Training Institute. We're an education and training provider, and we essentially train coaches and other helping professionals in how to use neuroscience with their clients, how to incorporate it into their practice. So we have coach training, we have applied neuroscience training, we have practitioner training, and also run another company called Brainfirst, which offers a range of different evidence-based supplements, nootropics, brain health, cognitive enhancement, that sort of thing.
Thank you very much, Ramon. I think we have material here for many podcasts. So wonderful. You mentioned several areas of neuroscience, and one of them is applied neuroscience. As far as I know, you started with applied neuroscience, and then you started expanding from it. Can you tell us about how you got to this applied neuroscience field and your journey from it already to all these things that you mentioned?
Yeah, sure. So I actually started out as a personal trainer and a health and fitness coach 20-something years ago. And I absolutely loved health and fitness. I loved helping people. And what I found over the many, many years of working with people, so I was working one-on-one with people for about 8 years. And one of the things that I figured out when it comes to those who get the result they want and those that don't is there's a big difference in how they approach behavior change, their mindset, the psychology behind what they're doing. There are a number of other areas as well, like, for example, emotion regulation. Those who were able to better manage their emotional state with regards to the frustrations and challenges as they're pursuing their goals were better able to accomplish those goals. And I always had an interest in psychology, but never really wanted to be a therapist. So I was looking for different ways of being able to help people accomplish their goals. And after the health and fitness side of things, working with people one-on-one, I was on the speaking circuit and traveling around the world and essentially attending seminars and giving seminars on a whole range of different topics. And one of the things that kind of grabbed my interest was the neuroscience side of things. And again, we're talking like back 10, 15 years ago now. I didn't really find anything that I could use with my clients. There wasn't much in the way of, practical, easily applied things with utility, that I could implement straight away with my clients that it was going to help them. It was either diving into the neuroscience literature and looking at all the different theories and really getting an understanding of what's going on there, but I didn't really find anything that I could apply. Or some of these kind of brain gurus who were around at the time, when I looked at the evidence behind some of the claims that they were making, it didn't really hold up either. So I actually decided to pursue the academic side and started a master's degree in applied neuroscience, conducting research that had some real world applications and practical utility, and decided, okay, look, this is going to be probably a little bit of a journey as I'm having to dive into the scientific literature, understand it fully, and then pull things out and then try them with clients. But that's what I essentially decided to do. it was probably around the time I was finishing my master's degree, and particularly around the research that I conducted, my first research project, which was how the emotions that we experience when we come up against obstacles and challenges as we pursue goals, how that impacts our ability to pursue goals. That was my first research project. Towards the end of that, I started to see, okay, look, we can really start to apply some of this. And I had other coaches and helping professionals, not just health and fitness coaches, but life coaches and executive coaches who I was connected with at the time, say, hey, I'd love to get hold of that. Can you share what you're doing? How are you using this? All we see is a lot of either wild claims that aren't substantiated or a lot of theoretical knowledge, but how do you actually use this with clients? And I started to share some of that. And that's where Brainfirst Training Institute was essentially born. I think back then we called it Neuro Coaching Institute because I couldn't think of a name, but I wanted to start sharing some of this information. And that's where it really started. And I think over the last 3 or 4 years, we've expanded the program offerings. We've got a number of program facilitators on now who are teaching brain-based coaching in alignment with the International Coaching Federation regulations and their core competencies and these sorts of things. And then, we're kind of, branching off into different areas. We've got the Brainfirst Radio podcast where I bring on neuroscientists and experts and people out there in the space who are doing similar sorts of things. Then we've got Brain Coach Radio, the other podcast where, of course, we've had you on as a guest, sharing your expertise and your wisdom around how to use neuroscience with clients. The supplement thing has been in the works for a long time. I always wanted to create a supplement company many, many years ago, but I didn't want to do the same thing that everyone else was doing in terms of let's offer a multivitamin or a protein powder or something like that. So I know it was probably about maybe 5 years ago that I really started to dig into the literature behind, okay, what are some of the earth-grown, the extracts, the herbs, the plants, the roots, things that may have been used for perhaps thousands of years in Ayurvedic medicine and these sorts of things. Is there any evidence behind them? The things that have been used in many cultures for healing and increasing energy and all these sorts of things. When I started to dive into literature, I found that there's a whole range of different ingredients and extracts and herbs and plants and things that show really remarkable properties when it comes to not just brain health, but cognitive enhancement, helping reduce chronic inflammation in the brain, other things like improving mitochondrial efficiency, increasing ATP. Of course, adenosine triphosphate is part of creating energy at a cellular level, things that support us on a hormonal level as well, which of course is really important as we get older. And so I started to create a range of different supplements that were earth-grown, evidence-based, and really can help us to perform at our best. And we've got a whole bunch of supplements planned to come out over the next kind of 5 to 7 years. And a couple of other areas that we're wanting to expand into as well. I think what underlines all of these different pursuits is essentially my interest in the area. It started off with an interest in how can I take neuroscience and help my clients. I'm interested in, because I've been taking a range of different supplements and combinations of different ingredients for many, many years. Okay, how can I create something that's going to benefit me, my friends and my family? And then, of course, if I like it and friends and family like it, other people probably like it too. But most of this stems from an interest in essentially trying to help optimize human experience, to help us become, first of all, myself and then people that I know, become high performers, the best versions of ourselves, to live a meaningful, fulfilling life and existence and be here for as long as we possibly can, as healthy as we possibly can, and to contribute and perform at our best, essentially.
Thank you very much, Ramon. Right now, there is an influx of interest about the brain, about the nervous system. The brain becomes a very, very popular hashtag everywhere. And people are trying to add this word brain to everything that they possibly can. What I really liked about what you were saying is that critical approach, critical thinking about the information we are receiving. You mentioned that even before going to study neuroscience, you started looking at the evidence of what you heard on the media from those brain gurus and so on and so forth. And you started to see that there is really not much evidence behind what they are saying. However, not everybody has this type of critical thinking. How would you advise people approach the information when they hear the word brain and there is something very popular about the brain and the person wants immediately to do something that is being said? How would you suggest to approach situations like this from this critical thinking perspective?
Yeah, I think it's such an important question and such a difficult thing to navigate for most people, because you and I know what's involved in research and analyzing the literature, having an understanding of how research is conducted, being able to look at papers and be able to determine what's a good quality paper versus a poor quality paper, and also to see that paper as part of a whole collection of evidence, because just because one paper says one thing doesn't necessarily mean that this is true in all situations. And so most people, unless we're in the field, are not going to sit down and go, oh, look, here's a really interesting article. I wonder if that's true. Let me go and do an extensive literature search and spend the next week or two going through and looking at all the papers, looking at all the theories, looking at all the current theories, the theories before that. Let me analyze the quality of the evidence and then come to a conclusion, go, oh, no, that's right. Yeah, no, that article wasn't on the right track here. Like 99.9% of people aren't going to do that. So what do? I think the first question to ask is really, what's the evidence for that? And being able to be aware of our biases. If we come across some information and go, oh, that sounds true, it fits, my perspective, that feels true for me, that seems to fit how I view the world or how I view myself or relationships or whatever the topic is. So I'm going to then take that on board, rather than just doing that as this sort of automated process that happens when we come across information, and perhaps we have this confirmation bias at play here as well, is to look at it and go, okay, well, maybe I investigate the evidence for that. I would suggest the first place to go would be, what is the opposite of this? And what can I learn from that as well? If I can provide a quick example, in nutrition, we see this all the time. People that want to go, I'm the high carb group. Oh no, I'm the high fat group. Oh no, I'm the high protein group. We, could call this more of the high carbohydrate. We could say keto, we could say carnivore. Or rather than perhaps reading an article and saying, okay, keto is best for the brain because we reduce the sugar spikes and we can convert some of these fats into ketones, and the brain, in terms of using fuel sources, ketone bodies are a really efficient fuel source. So that must be true. So I've got to eat keto and I'm already in this camp. Maybe it's a case of going, okay, well, what can I learn from the high carbohydrate group or the high protein group that can add to this conversation so that I have a more balanced view of what's going on here? I think that'll be the first step, asking the question, what are the opposing theories? What are the opposing approaches? Is one way of doing it. Of course, we can then dive deeper into the evidence and say, okay, well, this particular claim, Keto is good for the brain. Ketone bodies are good for the brain, and it's an efficient fuel source. Let me dive in and see what the claims are behind this. And I've done this a couple of times when reading articles online, and you see a little citation mark and you go down to the reference and then you go and have a quick look at the paper. Even quickly scanning the paper, you can see that this is a really wild claim. Yet when I go to this paper, it was a single mouse study conducted in 1976, and all I can see is an abstract. And okay, something doesn't quite add up here. I'm thinking maybe the person who wrote this article has just thought up an idea and thought, oh, I better find some evidence for it, and has gone and found a study. Perhaps they haven't even had access to the full studies, that they've just read the abstract and gone, okay, that'll do, and shoved the citation in there. So I think that then adds to the credibility of the article, and maybe you could view this through a more skeptical lens and say, perhaps this doesn't really hold up. Maybe I could go and look for some evidence for what's really going on here if I want to kind of dive down the rabbit hole and investigation, this exploratory journey of figuring out whether this claim is true or not. So there are probably a couple of places to start. I think another helpful approach would be to maybe find 2 or 3, maybe 4 people that are experts with the topic or in the topic that we're reading or hearing about, and real credible sources that we know that they do the literature searches, they do the analysis, they've conducted research themselves, they're considered real experts, or perhaps even going to the top 2 or 3 journals and having access to those. So, but that would be another layer again. We're starting to get into territory now where it's like, okay, I'm probably going to need to spend significantly more time. But I think the very first step is check our biases, look for opposing views and theories, and getting a more well-rounded approach so that we're not so, I don't know, what's the word? Maybe dogmatic in our approach. We're not so strict. We're not such a, oh, I'm this sort of person, so I'm only going to look at the evidence for this approach.
Thank you very much, Ramon. The most important is not to limit our views to only one. Try to expand them and look at different approaches and at the evidence. Thank you. You mentioned that all the things you do, neuroscience related and brain-based coaching and supplements and other programs, you are doing all this because you have interest in neuroscience. So it's something that really interests you. Even now when you are speaking, you have those glowing eyes. You are talking with passion. How do you keep this passion going? What are your secrets for being passionate about it for already quite some time?
I'd say there's probably 2 things. One, I find new things to do. So when was it? I've been thinking about a new supplement to add to our collection. And I mapped this out many, many years ago, but there's so many things that I could choose from. And I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and they said, oh, I really struggle with this. I would really love some help in this area. Like, are there some foods? What are the things that I can do to help me in this area? And I'm like, oh, hang on a second. I've got one of these products planned. And that kind of, I'm not just creating something for the sake of creating it. I'm usually creating it because it's going to help me to start with, and it's going to help other people as well. Because sometimes sitting in the office, going through the literature, I speak to my students quite often, but they're operating at a different level than perhaps someone who is off the street. We go out into the street and there's 100 people and you ask 99 people about neuroscience and all these sorts of things, and most of them would, oh yeah, I've heard about the brain stuff, but maybe they don't really have much of an interest. But I do have this complaint. I've got brain fog and I'm forgetting names, and okay, great. Like, that gets me excited. What are the things that we can do to help that person? I had this individual the other day talking about an issue, and I'm like, oh, that's reminded me of this particular product that I mapped out and started creating a few years ago. Let me dive back into the literature now and spend the next kind of month doing that to figure out, okay, what are all the different ingredients that could be mixed together in synergistic ways to form some complex that's going to help this person in this particular area. So that gets me excited. When I can relate what I'm doing to helping someone, that gets me excited. Or we're launching this Brainfirst, this massive Brainfirst practitioner program at the moment. When I get to speak to someone about it and they said, oh, I'm really interested in learning how to help someone in this area. Can you tell me about the research here or this new program you've got or whatever it is? I'm like, oh, great. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I love to share the information, share how they can help somebody else. That gets me excited. So I'd say that's two things, really. Finding new things to do, new programs, new products, basically creating new things. And then the second part would be how I help people with those things, or how people are helped. Even if it's not me, it's through the coaches and through the helping professionals that are taking the information and then helping their clients, and then getting the feedback from them. And they're saying, oh yeah, I had this client and I tried this approach out that I learned from you, and wow, it was amazing and it really helped. And this problem that they've had for a number of months is now resolved, and they're living a more meaningful life. I'm like, wow, that lights me up, because I can see there's a real world result. And that's the whole purpose of applied neuroscience. It's not just leaving it as theoretical knowledge. And that's really cool. Like, I love learning new things and love coming across new information, but it's then, how can we put this into practice? Who can we help? How can they be helped? How can we accelerate their results? How can we get them living a more meaningful, fulfilling, joyful existence where they're performing at their best every day? And hearing the stories and having the experiences with people, that would be the second thing. That's probably the first thing.
Thank you very much, Ramon. I relate to you talking about doing new things. Because when we start new things, when we start implementing our ideas, we have this influx of energy. The problem starts somewhere in the middle or more towards the end, when that energy starts to subside. And the challenge is actually to finish what you started, because you might already have new ideas that you want to implement. Did you experience anything like that? And if so, what helps you not only to start new things, but actually bring them to fruition?
Yeah. Having a deadline, and not a self-imposed deadline. This is something that we know from the research on procrastination. There are a number of different variables in this procrastination equation, but the biggest one, the one that has the most impact, is having a deadline. Like, if we don't have a deadline, or we have a self-imposed deadline, a goalpost that we can keep moving, then we're unlikely to move towards completion of a particular project. So I set a deadline, like Brainfirst practitioner. This is a great example. I ended up splitting it into 2 levels because it was a 40-week program, and I thought that's just too long. I also want to be able to give people an opportunity to enroll twice a year rather than just once a year. So I split it into 2 levels. I really wanted to get it out this year. So I thought, okay, knowing that across November and December, we have a break, from Thanksgiving onwards, people are kind of winding down. They've got Christmas, they've got commitments. I thought, okay, so I need to really finish up the first 20 weeks prior to then. I'll go from there backwards to 20 weeks. That means I start 6th of July. And this was a few months ago, right? I'm starting 6th of July. What do I need to do to get everything ready prior to then? And that keeps my energy going, because I now have a deadline. I now have commitments to other people. I can't move the goalpost, because if I'm not starting in July, that means I'm now having to start in February next year. Like, that's far too far away. And then as July rolls in, more pressure builds up. And that pressure keeps that energy going. It's part of this whole equation of generating, I'm not going to say motivation, I'm going to say generating energy for action. And actually, one of the things that I learned from Gabrielle Oettingen with her mental contrasting technique, actually contrasting the desired future against the present reality and using that energy, that energization of overcoming the obstacle to actually drive us forward. And I think a part of that is having deadlines that we create or make. And I think a big part of having a deadline is making a commitment to other people, particularly if you're the type of person that's like, I'm not going to show up and be unprepared. I'm not going to show up and half-ass this. Like, I want to deliver the best experience. If that is a value of yours, then having commitments to other people is and certainly going to help. When you have that deadline, it's like, right, I need to be prepared. I need to show up. I need to work on this. And sometimes, particularly in neuroscience, like you work on projects for months to years. So how do you keep that going? It's not like I can create something now and the project's going to be ready in a week or two. Like, some of these projects take years to plan and prepare and go through the literature just to get to the point where you can actually create something. So I think it's a really important question to answer. How do we keep that energy up for months and years at a time? And I'd say, yeah, deadline is certainly a big part of it. For the programs, for me, the supplements is something else. And maybe this is also part of it as well. Having something tangible, something concrete, something that's finished and in your hand. There's something about that for me. I love physical products. I love being able to touch and hold things. So getting to the point where with our contract manufacturer, I've worked out the formulation, I've got that ready. And sometimes I procrastinate around that. Sometimes I go off on a tangent. I start on this product, I move over to this product, come back to this one. But when I start to see that, hey, we might be only a few weeks away from being able to get the contract manufacturer to make a sample. And then we get the sample and I hold that in my hand. I'm like, right, we're getting somewhere. This is progress. And then that goes out to our testing groups and we get feedback on that. And then we might need to go through a few sample creations. But that's something that accelerates it for me. You know, we do the label design and then it's off to full production and then that's finished. And then that goes off to the warehouse. Like, that's a very exciting time for me. So as I move closer towards that, to having a physical finished product in my hand, that energizes and excites me. I think maybe that's something else is tapping into what is it for us as individuals that gets us excited and keeps us going. And for me, it's progress. Even if it's progressing just a little bit, if I can get it to the next phase of completion, then that keeps me going when it comes to the product side of things. So I think it's you know, if I had one piece of advice, it would be to know yourself, know what makes you tick, know what excites you, and then try and create some sort of hard deadlines where you have some accountability, or you have to show up for other people by a certain date and a certain time. And that's really going to accelerate this process. It's hard not to, when you have a deadline, to leave it to the very last minute and go, uh-oh, I'm in trouble now.
Thank you very much, Ramon. I purposely asked you about this because we have students listening to our podcast, students who are in a process of completing their thesis, completing their projects. That's why this topic of bringing the project to its end is very, very relevant. Speaking about students, we are discussing various disciplines within the neuroscience field. And you started branching up after finishing this applied neuroscience program. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about applied neuroscience? You already mentioned applied neuroscience is geared towards producing real results. So can you tell a little bit more about this field?
Yeah. neuroscience is such a massive field, and it's the same thing with applied neuroscience. I first started out learning about all of the different areas. So I had a little bit of knowledge about everything, a little bit of knowledge about motivation, a little bit of knowledge about, we're talking about neuroscience knowledge here, and also diving into the psychology literature and into related fields for those particular topics. So learn about motivation, learned about emotions, I learned about behavior change, I learned about health and sleep. And as I mentioned before, my first research project was on the impact of emotions as we overcome obstacles and challenges and our emotional processing as we're pursuing goals. My master's thesis was on taking the existing sleep hygiene assessments, which I thought were very outdated and not seen through a neuroscientific lens, and taking a neurobiological, neurophysiological approach to sleep hygiene to see if it's going to, improving that with a neurophysiological lens, is going to essentially impact sleep quality, and then bringing in some other things like chronotype, genetic propensity, or genetic-based preference for different sleep timing schedules. So these are two fairly unrelated things. And that's because I was learning about all of these different areas. So learn about whatever the topic is. Just go and dive a little bit into all of these different topics. And then the next step for me was figuring out, okay, what are the things that really drive the bus here? And with this idea of high performance and, living a fulfilling, meaningful existence, being happy and having well-being and health, happiness, well-being, all these sorts of things. What are the needle movers here? What do I really need to be an expert in? And the first one was emotions. So I spent at least a year, maybe 18 months, studying fairly exclusively affective neuroscience. Because I thought if I can figure out the emotion side of things, that probably impacts every area of our life. And I already had a background in the, let's call them physiological needs, the sleep and the nutrition and the movement and the overall health elements. I already had a lot of experience in working with people in that area, so that came fairly easy to me and fairly quickly. But the emotion side of things, and then, it may seemingly be unrelated, but motivation and behavior change, this idea of motivation and emotions really, there's so much overlap between the two. And then, of course, the behavior change stuff. So I would suggest that for applied neuroscience, go and experience a little bit of every topic so that you know the impact that sleep has on our cognitive performance, so that you know that the impact that emotions have on our motivation, so that you know that how even things like nutrition impact our ability to change our behavior and sustain that desired change. How do all these things relate to one another? And then pick a topic or two that you're super interested in and go deep, become a real expert on a topic. It wasn't until I really went and exposed myself to all of these different topics that I then went, okay, now I need to narrow it down to emotions. And now I need to narrow it down to motivation. Because before that, I was like, maybe it's something to do with goals. Maybe it's something to do. I didn't really know until I looked at all the main theories in all these different topics, how they related to one another, and what grabbed my interest as well. For some people that I've spoken to, it might be, take Dr. Michael Bruce, the sleep doctor, who's been on the podcast a couple of times. He's all about sleep. And actually, to your question earlier, how do you stay interested? I asked him once, you talk about sleep all the time. You do all these interviews. You write all these books all about sleep. How do you maintain interest? And he said, when I speak to someone and they say, I'm still sleeping really poorly. Okay, well, you're doing early morning sun exposure, setting the same bedtime and rising time, stopping food and drinks and eating and those sorts of things 2-3 hours before bed. No, I'm not doing any of that. And he's like, man, I've got so much work to do to help people sleep better. They're still not even doing the basics, right? But I think something that really grabs our attention, and then go deep on that, and then figure out, particularly if you're interested in helping people, right, how can I help people with this? For me, when I studied affective neuroscience, and I was actually working with coaches at the time doing some business coaching, I was like, man, why do some of these coaches not persevere? Why do they not persevere towards their goal when they come up against these obstacles and challenges, these frustrations? An obstacle comes up, marketing campaign's not working, I feel really frustrated, and I stop. And maybe I leave it for a few days. I come up against another obstacle again, or the same obstacle. It pops up. Oh, no, I hate this. I'm frustrated. The marketing campaign's not working. I hate marketing. I don't want to do it. And they stop. And then they leave it for a month. Then maybe they come back again. And then maybe it's the third time. And now they're like, no, forget marketing. I'm not doing marketing or advertising again. I'm done. And what I figured out is that they are often associating that pain or frustration with the activity. But then there are other people that felt the pain and frustration, and when they come up against the obstacle, and they persevered anyway. I'm like, what's going on here? When I looked at the neuroscience literature, and especially around emotions, I discovered that people process their emotions. They have a view of their emotions that are slightly different from one another. And if I can use a little bit of the technical jargon for a moment, I figured out that there are some people who tend to avoid their private internal experiences, their bodily sensations, the private internal events. They call it this experiential avoidance. And then those who accept it, and when they come across an obstacle or challenge, they're accepting of the fact that they're going to feel frustration, and they pursue their goals anyway. And when I looked at the evidence and I conducted this research and we split them into two groups, we figured out that those that have this avoidance style of emotional processing, actually, when they come up against an obstacle or challenge, the more their negative affect increases, the less they persevere towards their goals. But those that have an acceptance style, they have a willingness, and I think that's the word here, to underline willingness to remain in contact with those private internal experiences, memories, thoughts, bodily sensations, emotions. The intensity of those negative private internal events increases. Their perseverance towards their goals is unaffected. But right, that's super interesting. So now we've got something that's applicable to people. So how do we take people that they come up against an obstacle, a frustration, a challenge, something that's going to give them some sort of negative internal experience, maybe negative emotion? How do we help them to shift towards an acceptance style of processing so that they continue pursuing their goal? Because the obstacles and challenges and frustrations and things are inevitable, right? Particularly if they're building their business. So that's when I took the theoretical knowledge, I applied it, I conducted the research. I'm not suggesting everyone has to go and conduct research to then be able to apply this stuff, but you can draw on existing theories, you can draw on existing models to say, right, how can I use this? We know that this is the case. Hey, let's move people into an acceptance style of emotional processing. And then, okay, what are all the ways of being able to do that? Well, we have a mindful approach. Actually, this then led into investigating the valuation system in the brain and how we make decisions and behavior change and these sorts of things, which led into investigating the impact of values on our ability to pursue goals. And you'll probably remember the fascinating experiments when people hold their values in mind and they have a willingness to stick their arm in freezing cold water for longer. They're willing to put up with pain and discomfort, this simulated pain and discomfort with the cold presser task. They're willing to do that for longer when they hold their values in mind. I'm like, great. Well, let's draw on values when people are pursuing goals because that's going to be important. They're willing to put up with more pain and discomfort. We know that from the evidence. So how can we then make that practical? In the coaching conversation, we can talk about values. We can talk about what's important about that goal for people. We can get right down to the values driving the pursuit of that goal and leverage that when they come up against obstacles and challenges. Well, that's a great way of being able to utilize the scientific literature to help someone accomplish their goals. So, yeah, there's a lot in that, but I'd say start wide, go deep, find something that interests us, and then how can we apply that to helping people, helping ourselves, helping our community, or contributing in some way. And that's usually around helping people in some capacity, I believe.
Thank you very much, Ramon. You mentioned overcoming challenges. So many things that can help us with that. And now, even from evidence-based perspective, can you share the biggest challenge that you can comfortably share that you overcame in your life? And what did you learn from it?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. Can't think of one that, I can think of challenges that felt like the biggest challenge at the time. I would say it's not the biggest challenge, but the thing that I've probably wrestled with the most, the thing that, based on the life that's important to me, the thing that I worked on for many, many years and took a long time to get there, and I'm still trying to figure this out and optimize it. It's based around productivity. The first challenge was trying to become a morning person, because I've always been a night owl, and anyone who's studied chronotype knows that if you're a night owl, you're up till midnight and you sleep until 10 a.m. Like, that's been me my entire life. I've always wanted to be a morning person, mostly because I felt that I could get a lot more done in the morning, and going into the afternoon, particularly when we're reading scientific literature and we have like quite cognitively demanding tasks, we need to be at our best. We need to have that mental energy and the clarity and everything else. Come 4 or 5 o'clock at night, I can edit videos and maybe post to social media, but reading a heavy neuroscience paper and being able to extract good information out of that, not going to happen. So I was really missing out on a lot of hours of productivity. So figuring that out, looking at my genetics, looking at all sorts of things to figure out how can I optimize my sleep and wake cycle, knowing that if I can sleep a little less, but sleep much better quality and have mental clarity and energy and be laser focused, even 4 or 5 hours of the day continuous, in and out of flow throughout that time, no breaks, no distractions, usually in the morning, which means getting up pretty early, then that would help me really accelerate the results that I was getting in my work, which would then give me the freedom to be able to have the type of lifestyle and life that I want. When I have children, being able to pick them up from school, be able to go to their sports carnivals, be able to go to the gym at lunchtime and then take the afternoon to maybe do a bit of light reading or go out and do some paddleboarding or an activity or something like that. That was really important to me. And so figuring out this, how do I optimize productivity? And part of that is getting this sleep-wake cycle right. So many people are trying to get more hours in their day or find more time. But I think that energy and being able to focus and concentrate and pay attention and being efficient is not just as important, possibly even more important, because, we can go to work for 6, 7, 8 hours, but if only 2 or 3 of them are productive because we don't have mental clarity and focus, and we know how to get in and out of flow and what all the flow triggers are and how to extract good information and how to leverage that, then, what are we doing for going to work for 8 hours? We might as well not even bother. How can we squeeze that right down to a few hours of working on the most important tasks, get in, get it done, get out, and of course, being able to then live in the other areas of our life that are important to us. So that would be the biggest one. And I'm always trying to optimize it, but basically reconfiguring my circadian rhythm to being able to get up. Like this morning, I'm up and down at the beach before the sun's even coming up, and I'm starting to see the sunrise. I'm getting the light on my face. I'm getting, all sorts of things going on in the brain in terms of the increase in cortisol and suppression of melatonin, getting that blue wavelength light to hit the eyes and the retina, and essentially priming this circadian process and regulating my circadian rhythm so that come time for example, this podcast, I can focus, I can pay attention, I can access the resources that I need to, and I'm not kind of stumbling through it because I'm half asleep. Like that was game changing for me.
Thank you very much, Ramon. Can you tell us about your future plans? Where do you see yourself with what you are currently doing, let's say in 10 years or maybe even in 20 years?
Yeah, actually, I was speaking with my partner about this only a couple of days ago. This is something else from the neuroscience literature that we know from intentional change theory, that sustained desired change occurs when we spend more time in what is known as the positive emotional attractor. And part of that, without getting into the technical side of things, a big part of that is always having in mind the personal vision and the values, where we see ourselves, what's our lifestyle, what does that look like to get this positive emotional attractor going, this positive affect, default mode network, and parasympathetic nervous system involved. So we're always talking about this. And so I think it was only like a day or two ago, I was talking about what we're going to do for retirement, because I'm always working backwards from when I would consider myself, if I live a long and healthy life, and let's say, I make it to 100 with health span, so I'm fairly healthy and mobile, and 90 to 100, I'm still doing well, and work backwards from there. And we're talking about like mid 60s to early 70s, which I'm 44 this month. So we're talking about 20 years time. And I'm like, I'll probably just be writing books. And well, this is the kind of relaxed lifestyle that we're having. And I'll just write books and things that interest me. And then my partner reminded me of my dad. I hope he doesn't mind me saying this on the podcast. He's in his early 70s, still seeing clients, and he loves it. He's a clinician and he loves that as well as many other things. So I'm like, well, maybe I'm still going to be doing the same thing. Maybe I'll still just be creating new programs with the supplement side, moving into more the personalized medicine approach to supplementation. Of course, we'll have so much more data in 10, 20 years to be able to help people in particular areas of their life, to help them overcome obstacles and challenges. So yeah, probably a very similar kind of thing in 10 years, probably in 20 years, maybe in a different capacity, but certainly still drawing on the neuroscience literature and the scientific literature in general, and trying to find ways of helping people with that. And that's really what I see as a really big part of my role. Is I'm a science translator in a sense, taking complex ideas and scientific literature and turning that into something that people can understand and use to get a result that they want in their life, to make their life better in some way. So yeah, probably the same thing in 20 years' time.
Thank you, Ramon. I like this term, a science translator. I think people really need this type of translators, because talking to people, I see their interest in neuroscience. They're trying to listen to podcasts like Huberman Lab. They say that they're really trying, but they don't understand, that it's too complicated still for them. So I think the more we make the information understandable, however, still reliable, the better will be our society off. So thank you very much for doing that. At the end of our podcast, I would like to ask the following. The name of our podcast is Neurocareers Doing the Impossible. What can you recommend to undergraduate students or to those who graduated or who want to change their careers in neuroscience, but certain things seem to be impossible right now. Even certain programs may not exist at the moment. What would be your recommendation to those people?
Yeah, then this is something that I think about quite a lot. And actually, I speak to particularly coaches and even my peers quite a lot and have done for many years. My approach to this, particularly when I moved out of the category of health and fitness, a role, health coach, personal trainer, and then to speaker, seminar leader in health and fitness. These are all existing categories. They're all existing roles. And I think that many of us are still trying to fit ourselves into a category or into a role. And we come across a category or a role, we say, oh, no, that's not for me. Oh, no, this one's not for me. I would suggest that, and certainly the approach that I took is I'm not interested in trying to fit into something that already exists. I'm going to allow something new to emerge based on what I'm interested in. I'm going to allow something to emerge based on what I'm interested in. And back when I started what eventually became Brainfirst Training Institute, there wasn't anything else out there that existed in terms of the program that I was creating, this applied neuroscience for coaches program and the approach that I was taking. That just emerged out of what I was interested in and problems that I wanted to solve for myself and for other people. And that's great. Okay, so how do I allow something to emerge and create essentially a new role for myself, a new category? The number of times that I've gone over defining my role, and it's even hard when people ask, oh, so what do you do as a job? I'm like, oh God, I'm going to take 10 minutes to explain this because I don't have a title for it. I don't have a simple description that I can give. I think science translator is the closest that I could come up with, but there's so many different elements to that science translator probably doesn't even make sense to a lot of people. A science translator for what? For who? How does that work? So how do we allow something to emerge out of a role or a new category or a new type of work or a new type of approach to emerge out of the things that we're interested in? And I say, you've got to go and experiment. You've got to go and try a whole range of different things. It's not until we can try a whole range of different things, collect a whole bunch of different experiences, draw from what we know about ourselves and what we're interested in from our past. Oh, well, in this job, I liked that part of it, but not this part. Okay, great. Bring that along. I like helping these people, but not those people. Okay, great. Bring that along. I like helping them in this area. For me, a huge part of that when I moved from working with people one-on-one into the health and fitness space on the speaking circuit and workshops and seminars, I was working with very different people. I started working with professionals and practitioners, like people who were helping other people. And when I started working with people who already had a reasonable amount of knowledge and experience, and I could talk to them more about the science and I could throw some of the technical terminology out there and they understood it because they'd been exposed to it compared to the one-on-one clients that I had. Man, I love working with people who are educated and experienced already. So I brought that into when we first started Brainfirst Training Institute. I'm like, I want to work with helping professionals. I want to work with practitioners. I want to work with coaches because they already have a fairly good base knowledge and that lights me up. If I need to take a complex piece of science and explain it to someone who has very little exposure to science and they're not really that interested in learning or understanding about the mechanisms of things going on in the nervous system, that doesn't excite me. So I need to be speaking to professionals and people who have at least some knowledge or interest or exposure to many of the scientific concepts and terms. So it's okay, great, I can bring that component. So what are the things that light you up? What are the things that you can draw on from the past and then go and experience as much as you can, expose yourself to all sorts of different topics and people and mentors and do like the number of courses that I did over the years. hypnotherapy courses, anything from NLP to motivational interviewing to basic behavior change stuff, even, courses that seemingly are unrelated. I learned something from that and thought, man, I really like that approach. How can I bring that on this journey with me to then allow something new to emerge out of all of my interests? So that would be my suggestion. Not try to fit into an existing role or category, but actually exposing yourself to a whole range of different things, including theories, knowledge, experiences, courses, trainings, get different mentors, read. I've got books from, obviously, we've got a ton of neuroscience and psychology books, but I've got some really bizarre books that I learned something from. I'm trying to think of one at the moment, but I can't. And then based on that, start taking what you know and what you've learned and putting it out there in the world, getting some feedback, and then allowing it to grow from there, rather than saying it has to look like this, it has to be this way, and I have to fit into this particular category. I've never found that really works that well for a lot of people. They need to take ownership. They need to make it their own, and having something emerge from within you rather than trying to fit into a pre-existing category or role, I think is a way that we can manage that whole process of aligning ourselves with our interests, our values, and doing things the way that we want to do them.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure, Ramon, to have you on our podcast as a guest. I hope we will see you again in the future, because you have a lot to share, and I think it can be very valuable for our listeners. So thank you again. I wish you all possible success on your amazing journey of translating the science.
Thank you, Melina. It's been an absolute pleasure. I love being on the show.
Dear listeners, I got so carried away talking to Ramon that I completely forgot to ask him for contact information. So here it is. To find more about what Ramon and his team do in applied neuroscience education and coach training, visit brainfirsttraininginstitute.com. And to upgrade your brain and life with earth-grown, evidence-based nutritional products, visit mybrainfirst.com or follow Ramon on Instagram at YourBrainCoach for tips on brain health, biohacking, and high performance. Thank you so much for listening. I'm looking forward to seeing you in our next episodes. Bye-bye.